Hello, and welcome to the Daring to Succeed podcast. I'm your host, Juliana Yao Jorgen. And today I wanted to talk to you about the part of a job search that doesn't always surface for people. What happens when your protective brain misinterprets the signals it's receiving about your situation. I know it might be a bit of an odd topic for me because for a while now I've been talking about not being a job search coach anymore. But when I actually look at my clients and what they're working on, the reality is that they may not be looking for work because they've been laid off or are otherwise in between jobs, but all of them are in a position where they're kind of ready for that big next move. For some of them, they've been in the same level of leadership for a few years now and are working on breaking through to that next higher level, a level that they've actually been working at for some time, but just don't have the formal authority or compensation to go along with the value they actually bring to the company. Others have been holding, or rather in a holding pattern, because of various visa and residency processes that have finally resolved. And others still have simply gotten to the point where they've gotten everything they could out of their current career path and are ready to explore something new and more fulfilling. No matter what their situation, the core comes down to the same thing: their next move. When I think about what my clients are looking for, it's funny because most of them kind of start at the same place as everyone else. They're looking for a fresh new CV, a job search strategy, and oftentimes just clarity from the constant stream of advice coming at them, whether solicited or not, on how to actually get that next job that they've been wanting. But as our coaching conversations unfold, the real reason that they haven't making progress becomes a lot more obvious. Let's take, for example, a seasoned leader who is extremely well respected at her company, to the point where people are often asking her why she hasn't been promoted to the next level of leadership yet. She was recently in a situation where she was being considered to replace her boss, who is just moving on to another role. What I found striking about the situation wasn't actually that she was considered. After all, she had all the skills, all the knowledge, and all the network connections to be the right successor. What was fascinating is that her protective brain, the part of our cognition that has evolved to focus on threat detection and mitigation planning, started going haywire when we got to the point where we were realistically assessing this as a potential next step for her. She said she was worried about taking over a quote unquote mess from her current leader, who was a subject matter expert, but a classic example of someone who was promoted for technical expertise, not for leadership finesse. My client was worried about scope creep of the team, low engagement, and poor relationships that she would inevitably inherit. When we dug deeper, what we found was that her concern came not actually from her own knowledge or even her ability to reset the team, but just from the fact that in all of her previous leadership roles, she had only ever been brought in to create something new from a blank slate. So her protective brain was going haywire because she had never had the experience before in adopting someone else's team and having to fix legacy issues that came with the role. What we did was appeal to her executive brain, the part of our brains that plan for the future, the one that's rooted in logic and data inspection. And we worked through the problem so that her executive system could see that this is something she would have eventually had to learn in her leadership career. With that, she was able to walk through the realistic scenarios and plan her next steps so that her nervous system could calm down enough for her executive brain to take the reins and restore her to her usual confident self. Another leader that I worked with finally got a new role and a new opportunity, and it was not for lack of trying on her end. She was always the most qualified, loved by her team, and always performed well for her leadership team. Every time we spoke, she was always able to articulate exactly why she was perfect for a particular role. But she always found herself floundering at the actual interview. What we realized is that her threat detection systems in her protective brain were working overtime, not letting her executive brain stay focused on the interview itself. Every little pause, every glance, every follow up question was ammunition for her protective brain to tell her that the interviewer had already decided against her. The result is she stopped trying in the interview and failed to showcase exactly why she was perfect for that role. Not because she didn't believe it, but her protective brain, the part that tries to keep her safe and protected, was doing too good of a job. Because she had been turned down for roles in the past, it was sort of pre-convincing her that she wasn't right for the role, so that if the outcome was negative, the disappointment might not hit just as hard. The work with her was different. It wasn't interview prep, and it wasn't even confidence building. It was reframing what all those signals could actually mean, so that in the moment when her protective brain registered every single thing that the interviewer was doing, the automatic response wasn't, oh, they're not interested anymore, but, oh, maybe they're tired, or maybe they're thinking, or maybe they're genuinely, positively interested. What mattered wasn't whether any of those things were true, but that her protective brain had a better default narrative to fall back on when other than one that would result in self-sabotage. This allowed her to stay focused on the interview while her protective brain ran in the background. And then there's the senior executive who was planning a departure after a long tenure in his role at a company. This one was fascinating because it took a completely different shape. He was preparing for a strategy session with his C-suite, and when he was talking about how he wanted to position the proposal, he said, I almost feel like I want to tell them that if they don't go for this, they better find someone else to run the show. He confirmed that he was still planning to leave the company whether he took the proposal or not. So he knew that the ultimatum would serve no purpose and insisted we press on to find out why he was feeling that way, even though logically he knew it wasn't the right path forward. What we concluded is that he needed to separate what his operational role as leader of the division was versus what is part of his actual career pivot strategy. Once he even had just that guideline, he knew that very clearly his proposal had nothing to do with his career strategy. It was purely to secure the future of that division. What that meant is their decision didn't actually have any bearing on whether he was going to stay. So getting a decision either way would just give him clarity on what his exit and succession planning would look like over the next year and a half as he prepared his team to be in a strong position to continue on without him, so that when he finally announced his departure, all that was needed was execution of his exit plan. All three of these leaders are working on their next big move, are highly capable, highly respected, and typically quite confident as they move through the challenges of leadership. Although they're all working on what we might consider searching for a new job or trying to get a promotion or working on a career pivot, the reason they weren't moving forward wasn't that they needed to upskill, that they needed a better resume or a LinkedIn profile. It wasn't even that they needed to go out and network like crazy or do a bunch of TED Talks to raise their profile. What was happening with them is something more subtle and more easy to miss. Whether it's moving into unfamiliar waters, racing against the possibility of another rejection, or simply trying to understand what an emotional response was really trying to tell them, all of these leaders were gently being pulled back from the threshold of an exciting new time in their careers because their protective brains were latching onto a story that allows it to do what it does best: protect them. But by inspecting the danger signals and casting them in the right light, one that their executive brains know is the actual real truth behind the situation, their nervous system could stand down so they could finally step into the future that they've been working so hard to reach. Okay, that's all for today. I'll see you next time.